Unfortunately, our last week was our last professional meeting of this calendar year. But we had a fascinating presentation from Dr. Petros Sideras out of Texas A&M. He presented on what he called a hybrid sliding rocking bridge column, the research that he's doing on that. It's very innovative. And just imagine bridge columns that function like human limbs. You know, they slide, they rock, they absorb seismic movement and such. So it's pretty fascinating. As is our practice, we're going to take the month of July off from our professional meetings, but we will restart when the school year starts up again. So you can keep up with us on this through the SEI website that you see on the screen. I would like to mention SET. This is the premier event that we do each year. In 2020, we had to cancel like so many things because of COVID. And we're watching the experts and considering the comfort levels and such of the participants to determine when to schedule it. Or when to start it again, but we're targeting either fall of 21 or spring of 22. But the event basically is just best described as TED Talks meets the Alamo Draft House. The overall goal is to have 4 presentations that each depart from the normal in the weeds technical presentations, but still apply to the profession of structural engineering. And we do this while relaxing with dinner and drinks at the Alamo Theater. We rent out a theater for it. Presentations are lively and philosophical, inspirational, sometimes thought-provoking, and sometimes kind of cause you to think about structural engineering a little bit differently. So S&T is a lot of fun, and it's truly an Austin original. It's something we came up with here. So just watch the website for further developments on that as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Marita, you are up next for YMF.
Hi, my name is Marita Moya, and I'm with Half Associates. And this year I was the younger member director. And today I have the honor of presenting our YMF scholarship awarded to a graduating high school student who's pursuing a STEM degree this upcoming year. This is our second year to award this scholarship, and it was really exciting to be able to review the applicants and select a winner. So this year, our winner was Jasmine Cho. She is unable, we were hoping to get her online today, but she is taking an AP exam. But we did want to take some time to recognize her really fast. She's graduating from McNeil High School, which is here in Austin. She'll be attending Harvard University this fall, pursuing a degree in computer science and applied mathematics. She was a very accomplished young woman. She really demonstrated enthusiasm for her studies as well as serving others. She served on multiple committees in her high school, between student council, on the orchestra group, and then also team captain of tennis. And she also just volunteered in all her free time at various nonprofit organizations in and outside of the school. And as she pursues her degree, she hopes to one day become a data scientist or a software engineer. So definitely wanted to send our congratulations to Jasmine and wish her the best in her future endeavors, and really all those students that applied. It was very competitive, and we hope them the best as they pursue a STEM degree. And then I think the next slide, I wanted to kind of touch base on our golf tournament this fall. We had to postpone it a couple of times due to just limitations, but it is this July. So please, registration is open. And this is really kind of what YMF does to help fund things like the scholarship, as well as various things that we provide for young engineers in the area. And we also do a donation to a local nonprofit, Sammy's House. So you can find registration, or if you have other questions, our golf committee chair is Sydney, and her email is down there at the bottom. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Marita. Next, I don't see Travis on for EWRI, so I'll just go ahead and talk a little bit. I know as much as you see on the slide. The Continuing Ed workshop is coming up at the end of July this year at the Renaissance Hotel. The theme will be resiliency for the future, planning for a changing environment. And so expect to see a save the date email and speaker list soon. And I'm sure you'll be able to sign up for that shortly after. Okay, next up then is going to be Sebastian to tell us about Travis County disparity study. Travis, are you ready?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Good deal. Thanks, Bradley and Paul, for inviting me to to join you all today. And, just for your support and partnership and helping get the word out about this study to your members. So the Travis County is conducting a disparity study that's historically underutilized business, which is the HUB program. And it's to ensure that HUBs have equal access to contracting opportunities and that the county's current program remains legally defensible and administratively successful. Colette Holt and Associates, which is a San Antonio-based, nationally recognized expert team on disparity studies in the MWBE and HUB programs, is leading the study with support from our firm, Cultural Strategies, and Beverly Silas and Associates, which both of our firms are certified with the state. So next slide. So the question, a lot of people ask is, what is a disparity study? This disparity study involves the compilation of evidence to determine whether the county has a strong basis for implementing race and gender conscious contracting remedies for its locally funded contracts and for narrowly tailoring its HUB program. And the research objectives include an evaluation of the county's current HUB program and evidence of disparities, if any, between the availability of HUBs and their utilization on county-funded contracts. And it also seeks to provide new evidence regarding the utilization and availability of HUB firms. So the approach will factor both quantitative and qualitative data. And the quantitative process will study the county's contract data, HUB availability, and examines the Travis area, county area economy as a whole, not just the county itself. So next slide. The qualitative process will gather anecdotal evidence from business owners and stakeholder organizations and membership associations. The approach will document input through an electronic survey, focus group, and individual interviews, as well as invite any submissions of comments. And this will help investigate and identify if any race or sex discriminatory barriers exist and how they might have or could have impacted the current HUB program. Next slide. The anecdotal data will help the county evaluate and decide if the HUB program is still necessary, who should be included in the program, what annual overall goals should be set, what methodology should be used to set contract goals, what program elements work, and what needs improvement, and if there are any enhancements that can ensure everyone has full and fair opportunities to compete. This aspect of the study is absolutely critical and can only happen with the robust participation from business owners, firms, and associations like yours. Next slide. So the question about participation really kind of comes down to three different opportunities. And the first, as I mentioned, the electronic survey, which will be released within the next couple of weeks. There will be small group owner sessions that are tentatively scheduled for this summer. There are written comments, which can be accepted through the website or through an email. Those can be, done individually through the association as a whole. Both of those addresses are here on the screen. The study is anticipated to be completed in towards the end of the year of this year, 2021. So if you have any questions about the study or would like to speak with the study team or the Travis County Purchasing Office, the number is there on the screen. It's the 855 number. And again, the website and email are included there for additional contact for the county. So with that, again, I appreciate the time to share this, and I'll, circle back with you all as soon as I get the link for the survey to see if that's something we can share with the members. So I'll turn it back over to you, Paul.
All right. Thank you very much, Sebastian. Okay, and I think that brings us to the end of the announcements portion of the program. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker today, Austin Messerli, a professional engineer with Friese and Associates. Originally from Oklahoma, he earned both a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Oklahoma. Boo. He relocated to Central Texas over 2.5 years ago and is happy to now call it home, obviously. Sorry. Austin has over 7 years of experience with municipal, county, and DOT transportation projects across Texas, Oklahoma, and the surrounding states. The most exciting part of his work is seeing all the various components of transportation projects come together to form a positive and lasting impact on the public. Austin is an active member of ASCE, first participating in the University of Oklahoma chapter, in which he eventually became president, then holding various positions professionally across Oklahoma and Texas. Currently, he serves as the Austin Branch Government Affairs Chair and the Texas Section Government Affairs Co-Chair. Previously, he helped chair the Highway and Roads Committee and assisted the Parks and Rec Committee of the 2021 Texas Infrastructure Report Card, participated in the National Legislative Fly-In, the Texas State Drive-Ins, MLRC, and student mentoring programs for UT. So with that, Austin, if you're ready to share your screen, all of you watching this afternoon, if you have questions for Austin, please go ahead and put them in either the chat or the Q&A box on Zoom, and we'll pose those to Austin at the end of his presentation. Austin, ready for you if you are.
All right, thanks, Paul. And if anybody can't hear me, just let me know, wave me down, and we'll figure something out. So thanks to ASCE for having me speak today. Thank you, Jacobs, for sponsoring this. The sponsors are the lifeblood of allowing us to do these meetings. So good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name's Austin Messerli. I am the local branch government affairs committee chair, as well as the co-chair for the Texas section. And I'll be giving a legislative update and all the happenings in the government affairs realm the last year, and especially during the session. We've had a lot of stuff going on, and I'm excited to talk to you all about it. So given a quick presentation overview, I want to be talking about what is ASCE Government Affairs and how it is set up, what we do, and some of the specific events that we've had over the last year, and some of the efforts that we've been involved in, how you all can get involved. And I'm sure, hopefully, this sparks a little bit of a fire in some of y'all, and you get active just as much as I am or more. And then lastly, leaving open some time for some questions about what's happening and going from there. So first things first, what is government affairs and what do we do? The Government Affairs Committee as a whole starts as a product of one of ASCE National's programs. As engineers, with many of our projects directly impacting the public well-being as well as public funding, it is extremely important for us as professionals to advocate for issues relating to all things infrastructure. ASCE Government Affairs takes a proactive approach with legislative representatives to discuss ASCE priorities and to make sure we're part of those conversations from the start to the end. Secondly, I want to emphasize the education part in those actions. Unfortunately, I know it's not extremely well known that we are the experts of infrastructure as civil engineers and as individuals that work on these projects on the public and private side. Just on the same page, when we're talking about if we hear about or we have a medical emergency, we go speak to doctors about it. That shouldn't be any different between civil engineers and infrastructure. With that being said, ASCE tries to get actively involved with policy comment and review with proposed infrastructure before it even hits the ground and the public can see it. We work on, again, on the educational side, working on informative reports. Most known is ASCE Infrastructure Report Card, but there's a lot of many other ones as well, like the Failure to React report on the national level, as well as individual incidents and how they impact infrastructure like when Hurricane Harvey hit the coast, ASCE Texas section pulled a committee together and provided a report to show the impacts it had on the infrastructure and how it responded. Similarly, with the winter storms that hit Texas in February, ASCE Texas section has pulled together a committee to develop a report and those findings to educate and provide input on how infrastructure was impacted. ASCE National is open and offers multiple government and press relations trainings with their full-time staff and experience. And many of the information that I'm going to talk to today is about public outreach, public information, as well as legislative outreach. They use all their resources and experience to help train the individuals on, like us, on the lower level, on the local level, to provide the best input and handle the situations the best. And so we actually held one of these government relations and public relations trainings as part of the recent ASCE dial-in for the state. And they're very, very informative and great opportunities if you ever get a chance. And then lastly, they assist the local branches and the Texas section in all their efforts, as they do have full-time staff. Most of us are volunteers working to maximize our efforts, but as with them being full-time, they help kind of keep everything organized and keep the information flowing and pay attention to some areas where we don't have necessarily the time or bandwidth. So starting off with kind of how the group is organized, starting with the national level, there's a lot of information on this slide, and most of it is just kind of give a little bit of an overview of how national is set up. But you can see here that there's a good amount of employees that help facilitate all those different avenues I just discussed: media relations, public relations, individual policies, whether it be transportation related or water or environmental, a code and ethics, as well as the infrastructure report card on the national level. And so you see that, and all those are resources that the local branches as well as the Texas section leverage to do all the activities that we have been and will continue to do into the future. So moving on from the national level, we move into kind of the Texas section and the local level. So with Texas section that oversees the Austin branch, we have our executive director, Lindsay O'Leary, who's a full-time employee, and then we have an elected president who currently is Sean Merrill. And he oversees a lot of the day-to-day activity, or a lot of the committees over the vice president of public affairs, the vice president of public professional affairs elect, who directly oversees the government affairs committee, as well as the local government affairs committee. So it's really a big kind of top-down to work to start that grassroots programs to where we're on the local level can be really impact in the most efficient way possible. So now that you've kind of seen an overview of how ASCE is set up and kind of what we do for a level, hopefully that'll translate exactly into our 2021 legislative efforts, 2020 and 2021 legislative efforts we've had over the last year. Kicking off the event was the CECON legislative panel. This is held every year at CECON, which is the flagship civil engineering conference that ASCE puts on for the Texas section. And we always host a legislative panel where we invite legislature members. And we had an invite, with it being held virtually last November, we had multiple House and Senate members right during election week. So we were really thrilled when we had multiple members come across and still participate. And that shows you kind of the value that we provide and how they want to influence, they want to be a part of our conversations. Next was the Texas Infrastructure Report Card. I'll touch a little bit more on actually what the details in the report, but that started a little over a year ago and it was released in February. Our flagship event for the Texas section is was the legislative dial-in. That was a little rebrand since it was virtual, but I'll go into a little bit more about it. The legislative fly-in that is held through ASCE National in Washington, D.C., but again, a general in-person event that was postponed to virtual, but still both events went off and we got a lot of great value from them. And then one of the last and almost one of the more important events is when we're in the process of bill reviews, providing comments as well as letters of opposition or for proposed legislation as they make their way through the Texas legislature. So starting off with the infrastructure report card, because this is a 4-year, every 4-year document that was produced. So the last one was in 2017. We all know that Texas is the largest continental state with the second, was one of the largest continental state with the second most populous state, and is an economic powerhouse for the nation, in leading the efforts in many industries. Our state is home to some of the largest infrastructure projects in the nation, but our nearly 20 million person population is rapidly growing and requires an increasing need for infrastructure improvements. It's always great to see cities and every place grow and bring in new influence. Unfortunately, when people come in and move to cities like Austin and the surrounding areas, they're not bringing infrastructure with them. And so how is our infrastructure holding up? And so that's the main purpose of this infrastructure report card, is to provide that input. And again, this was started with really a great group of people leading it. It was one big committee that encompassed actually from across the state of about 55 people that pulled together to complete this report within the year that we expected. We had 12 total categories that were investigated, some for the very first time: aviation, bridges, dams, drinking water, energy, flood risk mitigation, that's actually formerly flood control, levees, public parks and recreation, which was which was the first time this was included, highways and roads, solid waste, transit, and wastewater. We had a summary brief that was released at the start of February with multiple media outlets covering, and additional news media that was brought in that wrote reports and individual interviews on different sections, like the highways and roads that were included, as well as local media that provided that as well. And the full report was released at the end of February, right in time for the legislative dial-in. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the Texas Infrastructure Report Card. Hopefully everybody's read it and taken a look at it, but just in case y'all haven't, there's two big takeaways from the Infrastructure Report Card. Is the grade, which kind of provides the input on where that infrastructure is in the whole grand and evaluated, and then ways to take, and then steps to improve that infrastructure moving forward for the next infrastructure report card, so we can track and ways to improve. So kind of starting out with the grades, all those 12 categories that I mentioned were evaluated based on capacity, condition, funding, future need, operations and maintenance, public safety, resilience, and innovation. And just like when we were in school, or if your children are in school, A is for exceptional, B is for good, C is mediocre, and D is poor, F is failing, and critical. So although these grades are important and very valuable, it is intended to be commentary. It's not intended to be any commentary on, nor the evaluation of the performance of any government, department, agency, or individual of these groups. We commend all these government agencies for their hard work and dedication to serving the citizens of Texas. And through that hard work of those individuals and the report card committees, this allows the citizens of Texas and the legislatures to understand the state of our infrastructure. So the report card, I'm going to show you the grades after this. We had 5 categories in good condition, which is B range, 3 categories in C range, or adequate condition, and 4 categories in poor condition or at risk. So here's an overall view of the grades that were presented. And we can see that Texas overall GPA was a C, which is a step in the right direction. We moved up from a C- in 2017 and are still above the 2021 national GPA at a C-. So we are moving in a positive direction, but we definitely need to continue to build on that momentum that we're having down here. We found improving trends in conservation, technology, planning, management, and overall increases in programs and availability of state funding and financial support. It's important to note that even though the GPA improved from 2017, some categories were not included last time that weighed the GPA downward and lowered the overall individual with their lower individual grades. So here's the entire list. We have our 5 that were in good with aviation, bridges, energy, solid waste, and transit. And then in poor condition, we have dams, levees, highways and roads, and wastewater. So there's always still room to improve. And with that, we also provide on how we can take those steps to improve and not just commenting on the impacts or the level of how infrastructure is performing. So 7 of the big takeaways that we want to pass on for infrastructure in the future is lead with vision. And this requires leaders from all levels, public and private, need to come together to ensure investments are spent wisely and everything's in place for maintenance, rehabilitation, and inspections. We also need to educate the public, promote public education with all planned infrastructure projects and the importance and value of infrastructure. Prepare for the future. We need leveraging material reuse, improve standards and emergency technologies, ensure infrastructure is resilient and sustainable. Maintain the balance. When considering local land use planning and the function of existing and new infrastructure, we must preserve the balance between the build and natural environments by installing zoning and development reforms. Collect and utilize data. Infrastructure designs need to consider environmental and climate impact for the future population growth, and use the latest data and scientific projections is crucial in those use. Leveraging asset management. Streamline asset management across all infrastructure can be accomplished by communicating long-term needs incorporated to maintenance costs into the initial investment. Invest now to realize the dividends later. Infrastructure investment should be increased consistent with the needs of all levels, or we jeopardize that future growth while losing our status, Texas's status as an American and world economic powerhouse. There's a reason people want to move here and enjoy the benefits of it, and we need to make sure we're staying on top of that so we experience that in the future. So that kind of covers the report card. I'm not going to go into the national report card that was released, but something similar, covering a similar topics, but not on the local Texas level. And that is another interesting document to read, and they provide their own comments as well. And so again, I highly suggest take some time for a Sunday read to take a look through both of those reports or ask questions if you have any on them. So the flagship event that the Texas section holds every 2 years is normally the legislative drive-in, where engineers from across the state travel here to Austin, to the state capitol, to discuss and meet with their legislature members. Unfortunately, we had to rebrand as the legislative dial-in due to being virtual. So, but that didn't slow us down at all. The event was held at the end of February. We had multiple trainings coming up that I previously talked about. An amazing kickoff event that we had speakers come in and give great value. And overall, we had about 50 plus attendees from across Texas. And I know a lot were from here in the Austin branch, which is a great value that we provide and really meaningful as the committee chair. I'm going to go into quickly about a few of the asks that when we sat down and the major topics that we discussed with our legislature in the legislative dial-in that centered around transportation, funding, resilient infrastructure, dams, levees, safety programs, as well as water and wastewater. So starting with transportation funding, the current funding levels for resources for the state's gas tax are inadequate to keep up with Texas projection growth. And I know there's been alternate fundings of different propositions, but we expect a $15 billion annual gap through 2040. And so we discussed increasing the gasoline and diesel motor fuel tax rates from 1991 rates and indexing them to inflation, as well as keeping those budgets consistent with the growth rates and evaluate long-term alternatives that some of you all may be aware of as transportation modes switch from your traditional gasoline-powered vehicles to, say, electric or any others that might come up. We also discussed aviation, airport infrastructure. The demands over the next 5 years are estimated at $11.2 billion. And one of the big items in aviation industry is passenger facility charges. Those have been capped in the past for over 2 decades at $4.50 a passenger. We were asking to increase those to allow for higher capital to fill in that $11.2 billion shortfall. And those were kind of two long-term items we talked about. And then on the short term, due to COVID, many of us that work with public agencies have seen the impacts that had as on budgets with lower demand on projects getting shelved till later. And we discussed with the legislature on utilizing the rainy day fund for an intended purpose, a short-term supplement while the economy, due to COVID-19, till the economy gains back speed and we're up to the budgets we were seeing prior to COVID. We talked about resilient infrastructure. And this refers to the capabilities to mitigate against significant hazards and risks and incidents that so they recover with minimal impacts to the public, the economy, and national security. We've seen severe weather. Generally, the most common one is when you see weather impacts, whether what I talked about, Hurricane Harvey or winter. We need to be able to bounce back from those without the impacts, long-term impacts where we're having to play catch up, not from one storm, not just regular maintenance, but also impacts from storms or events like that. The dam and levee safety program. There are currently 7,324 dams in Texas, with some of the oldest and over 170 years old. more than 3,000 are exempt from safety requirements based on the Texas Water Code. And their estimated cost to rehabilitate these dams exceeds $5 billion. So we were asking for increased funding for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, to help administer, finance repairs, and of the dams classified as high hazard. And then lastly, we talked about wastewater infrastructure, and as our systems age, it increases the risk. There's an anticipated shortfall of $200 million for wastewater infrastructure, with sanitary sewer overflows more than doubled from 2016 at 2,500 to nearly 6,000 in 2019. And some of you may be thinking, well, what were the reasons for asking about transportation, resilience, dams, levees, and wastewater? If you remember back to the report, these were all specific areas that performed in the D category. And so we really tried to take what the report card said, make it digestible, and get it out into where the most needed areas are. So that was the legislative drive-in. Now the legislative fly-in, which is the ASCE National Legislative Event, is a yearly event that's coordinated through the ASCE Government Affairs for events in Washington, D.C. Typically, it's a 2-day program that gives really the participants a look in the public policy process. A few highlights of the program is, one, getting to meet your senator or your House of Representative member. And that usually occurs on the second day. So the first day includes briefing sessions on what's going on in Congress and what ASCE has done in the past and their priorities and our priorities, the training on advocating in this meeting with your legislative leaders, as well as ways to continue those conversations, because that's the most important thing. They are our legislature members there on our behalf. And so it's not just a meet once a year, it's a way to continue those conversations as we move forward. In previous years, we've had over 200 ASCE members visit almost 300 congressional offices throughout the nation, advocating for transportation, aviation, water, all infrastructure, and urging members of Congress the importance of infrastructure and its impacts on their daily life as well as ours. So one of the last events or kind of activities that we're involved in, since it's not really an event, is bill review, comments, and as well as letters. So I'm going to give kind of 2 examples of what we kind of handled over this session, but there's a few other ones I could go into if anybody has questions or would like to know more, just for the meeting purposes. But we had a legislature member reach out to ASCE and wanted us to provide comments on a bill that they were working on prior to being sent or being proposed. And so we got to work directly with their legislature member, their staff, as well as themselves, and review, comment, and provide our inputs as experts on infrastructure to move forward with this bill. And this was a kind of a companion bill between the Senate and the House, Senate Bill 1160 and House Bill 3029, that dealt with the potential Gulf Protection District. On the other side of it, there was a recent, we're not necessarily always for some bills that are proposed to the state legislature, which is in this case. So when this bill was proposed, ASCE worked with a lot of our local public agency, or a lot of our staff that work at public agencies as to voice an opposition. And so we got together as the Government Affairs Committee and developed a letter that an opposition letter that we sent out to the committee members as well as the committee itself to voice our opinion against this specific House bill. And I just got word, not even 30 minutes before this meeting, that it was voted down. And everybody that worked hard on this, we really got to see our efforts translate directly for the positive. So many of the questions that anybody is probably asking themselves now is, how can you help? And hopefully hearing some of these events got you a little bit excited to get involved in it as they come around next year. But first things first is we have a government affairs committee, and getting involved with the Austin branch and the Texas section opens up those areas, because we're always looking for great people to get involved and provide their input as well on interesting things that we need to. We also have on the national level the Key Contact Program, which the Key Contact Program is an individual member who is generally interested in public policy. And at the most basic level, you're providing your input to key alerts that come across dealing with legislative on a local or a national level, and sending emails to your legislature members or staff to support ASCE's policies and our policies on infrastructure. And then lastly, with CECON being in person this year, when you're in attendance, the legislative panel is always one of the key events. Make sure you stop by. It's always an exciting time to get to ask questions and bring and learn from the views from politicians and elected members on their views on infrastructure and how they think we can make things better. So with that being said, I wanted to open up for questions and comments to see if anybody has anything.
All right, thank you very much, Austin. We do have a few questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read those now. Sophia Carrillo asks, how did the freeze a couple months ago affect the energy grade?
Good question. And we have had to deal with that. It's kind of interesting that we released that brief report with all the grades a week before the storm hit. So we released it on a Wednesday. The storm came in on Sunday and Sunday night, and that was a pretty common question. And the way that the energy grade was developed was on our energy distribution and not specifically the energy production. And I'm not an expert on this area, but the way that I remember how it happened was we can't investigate every aspect of it. And so we have to take into account, and that's where our energy distribution, because energy production is also on the private side when you're dealing with a lot of the energy producers. And so we investigated distribution, which handled fairly well comparative to a lot of the other aspects of the industry infrastructure during that winter freeze.
All right, do you think it will have an impact on the next report card?
There's a chance we may expand the scope of that and look at a little bit more of the energy production.
Mm-hmm.
And so that may be something that they take up in, I guess, now in 3 years. And I'm excited, and I'm sure, and hopefully a lot of the other people are here listening as well as across the state are interested to hear about that committee's findings and their reports that's going to specifically deal with a lot of this question as well as how to potentially respond in the future.
Okay. Next up, Michael Newman asks, how do we promote the report card so that it does not appear self-serving for more civil engineering work?
Well, that's a very common question, and we use the infrastructure too. I mean, I work in the transportation side, and yeah, I still drive on the roads, even though I design them, and I hope I'm driving on the ones that I design. So I think there's ways to promote it, but I don't think that there's not a self-serving policy to it, because we all use infrastructure, whether you're just a school student getting water, using the restroom, to us in the civil engineering, or a legislature member in the legislature. You still drink water, you still use the restroom, you still want the electricity to turn on, you still have to get to work. So I think going through and explaining, if somebody asks that question, coming through and explaining that you're a user just like anybody else is as much shows that value, and even more leans to your expertise of what goes into in building those roads and building those water wastewater treatment plants and those connective systems.
Okay, thank you. Casey Paul asks, did y'all look at other options for raising infrastructure revenue, like taxing tires instead of increasing the gas tax?
So we didn't necessarily investigate those options. There's a lot of different options, and we presented those options to the legislature members. Ultimately, our job isn't to make the laws. We like to help out and provide as much input. And there's DOTs, I want to say Oregon, that looked at vehicle miles traveled as a way, as an alternative to gas tax. There's positives and negatives to those. And so we tried to present those options and provide as much input as we can for our members of legislature, if that's the way they want to go forward in the future.
Okay. And Jen Henderson asks, I see that the focus of this is at the state level. The ability to affect change for a civil engineer can be impactful at the local level. Why are we not doing more as an organization to influence and empower at the local level of politics?
I'm guessing that question really relates to your city governments and city politics. So the mayor or city council or county commissioners in that case, because I think that our effort, like if you're referring to possibly making like a local Austin report card, there's a lot of efforts that go into that. And I think to creating a report card, and I think it would be outstanding if we had the time and availability to create, say, like a Central Texas report card, but we're kind of limited on resources and time. And also, as a state legislature, you're beholden to your constituents on that local level, and their influences, as it may be a state law, but it's supposed to be it will still impact us on a local level. And so I think you can't really, there's a lot of gray lines in that, and you can't say, well, federal doesn't impact us because it's in Washington, D.C., or if I live in El Paso, that state doesn't necessarily impact us as much as our El Paso city government, but they still have those impacts, especially when it comes to funding resources and allocations that way. So there's a lot of gray lines between that.
All righty, and one final question from Bob Demium. When would the next infrastructure report card work start up, and who do we contact to get involved? What area section do we need support from volunteers?
We're always looking for volunteers. Like I said, we had a 55-person committee, and we always try to get it to expand. There were actually some categories, and I don't remember them off the top of my head, that we didn't quite make the cut because we were looking for volunteers. And so if you're looking for getting a volunteer, emailing the government affairs, and I can get that email at the Texas section, or the Texas section government affairs is really one of the great ones, to because that's always a constantly monitored email, but we will start work on the 2025 report card generally around the first quarter of 2024, because it takes about a full year. And that allows for drafting updates as well as our public agency review periods. So, and then finalizing everything and getting the report to look nice and clean that everybody sees the finished product on.
All right. I believe that is the last question. So Austin, thank you very much for presenting for us today. Really enjoyed it. A lot of useful information. Bradley, I will go ahead and turn it back over to you.
All right.
Thank y'all for having me.
Yes, thank you, Austin. We appreciate it. It's a very critical and valuable topic. So, so thanks for presenting today. All right, so I am now going to ask our membership chair, Augustine, who I'm not sure is here, for our head count. So I might fill in for him. I think I saw it at its highest around 61. If somebody else saw it differently, please feel free to chime in. Otherwise, that concludes our luncheon for today. Thank y'all for being here. We've got one final luncheon on June 15th before we take our summer break. Hope to see you then. In the meantime, stay healthy and safe, and we'll see everyone back here in a month. Have a good one.
Thanks, Bradley.